Have you ever had one of those moments, a feeling of complete awe or a deep, powerful spiritual connection, and wondered, what is actually happening inside my brain right now? Well, today, we're exploring that exact spot, that fascinating intersection of neuroscience and faith. It's a place where brain scans meet belief and where some of the oldest questions about the soul are being looked at in a brand new light. Let's get into it.
I mean, think about it. It's the one thing you can never, ever doubt, your own awareness. But why? Why does all that electrochemical fizzing in your brain create this rich, private, inner world of thoughts and colors and feelings? This, right here, is the huge mystery that scientists and philosophers are all desperately trying to solve. So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start by exploring that puzzle of your inner universe. Then, we'll see how science is trying to decode the brain's music. After that, we'll look at that powerful gut feeling of a mind that's separate from the body. And then, this is the really cool part. We'll explore 4 different ways to build a bridge between science and faith before we peek into the mind's future. Okay, so let's begin with the most intimate and yet the most mysterious thing any of us will ever know, our own inner universe. And I'm not talking about outer space here. I'm talking about the space right behind your eyes, that personal reality you live in every single moment of your life. You know, everything from the pure joy of watching a sunset to the quiet stillness of prayer, it all happens right here in this field of awareness. For centuries, this whole thing was considered way too slippery for science to even touch, but that has completely changed.
So now, let's turn to the scientific search for the mind. This is basically an attempt to find the physical sheet music for the soundtrack of our inner lives. How is this music actually being played by the brain?
The main strategy is all about finding patterns. What researchers do is they compare brain activity when a person is aware of something, like, say, a really faint image flashed on a screen, versus when they're not aware of it. That difference, the thing that lights up only when they're aware, that's the potential signature of consciousness itself. But as you can probably guess, finding that one single signature is proving to be incredibly difficult. I mean, look at this. The field is just crowded with competing ideas. Now, we're not going to get lost in all these acronyms, but just to give you a feel for the debate, let's look at 2 of the biggest contenders.
And this really shows you what the debate looks like. Let's take 2 heavyweights. On one side, you've got a theory called IIT. It suggests consciousness is basically located in the back of the brain, in that dense, complex web of sensory areas. But then, another big theory, GNWT, says nope, it's more like a brain-wide broadcast that involves the front of the brain, where information becomes available to everyone, so to speak. They're looking in totally different places for the exact same thing.
And this leads us to this fundamental wall that science keeps running into. We can map the activity that goes with an experience. We can see the neurons fire, but we still can't explain why that particular firing pattern should feel like the color red or the sting of regret. There's this huge gap between the objective mechanics and the subjective feeling of it all.
Now that gap, that's exactly where another incredibly powerful human intuition comes into play. You know the feeling that we are somehow more than just our physical brains, that there's a ghost in the machine.
And it turns out, this isn't just some idea that comes from culture or religion. Cognitive scientists have found that we are actually natural-born dualists. From a really young age, we seem to treat minds and bodies as if they operate by 2 completely different sets of rules.
The psychologist Paul Bloom just puts it perfectly. He says, we are natural Cartesians. It's like our brains come pre-wired to feel a separation between our physical body and the me that thinks and feels and believes. It's an intuition that runs incredibly deep in our psychology.
So, how do we hold both of these things at once? On one hand, you have the scientific data that points again and again to the brain. And on the other, you have this deep, powerful intuition of a soul, often expressed through faith. This is where we stop thinking about it as a conflict and start thinking about it as a conversation.
And thinkers who've been wrestling with this have come up with some really sophisticated models. We're going to walk through 4 of the key ways people are trying to integrate what neuroscience is finding with spiritual belief.
All right, the first approach basically says that science and faith are just asking different questions. They're operating on different levels. So neuroscience can tell us how neurons fire when you pray, but it can never tell you why you pray or what that prayer actually means. They're just different, non-competing ways of explaining things. The second model, and this one really speaks to that natural dualism we were talking about, sees the brain as an instrument. The soul, the real you, uses the brain to interact with the world. This is a really elegant way to explain why brain damage can change our personality, right? If you damage a piano, the music gets all distorted, but that doesn't mean the pianist has disappeared.
Now, a third model kind of throws out that ghost in the machine idea altogether, and it actually echoes some much more ancient holistic views. It sees a human being as a fundamental unity. The word soul isn't a part of you that can be separated. It's a word that describes the whole of you in your deepest identity. So from this perspective, neuroscience is simply exploring the physical side of this unified, ensouled person.
And finally, there are some modern thinkers who fully embrace the idea that we are completely physical beings. In this view, there's no separate, non-physical soul. Instead, God's creative power is at work in and through the material processes of the brain. The physical world itself, in all its scientific wonder, becomes the stage for the divine.
So, where does all of this leave us? Well, this whole conversation isn't just some abstract philosophical exercise. It's actually a dynamic and rapidly evolving frontier of science. Let's take a look at what's happening right now at the very edge of this new research.
There's a brand new field called neurotheology, and it is directly studying what is happening in the brain during spiritual moments. I mean, scientists are literally putting longtime meditators and people deep in prayer into brain scanners to try and understand the mechanics of these profound experiences.
And one of the most incredible discoveries coming out of this is that these practices aren't just fleeting moments. They physically change our brains. It's a process called neuroplasticity. The old saying is true: neurons that fire together, wire together. Repeated meditation or prayer can actually strengthen certain neural circuits, literally reshaping the brain's hardware over time.
And these changes aren't just theoretical. They have real-world effects. Study after study is showing that a sustained spiritual practice is linked to tangible benefits for our mental health. Things like reducing anxiety and depression, and boosting our overall sense of well-being and purpose in life. So if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. This dialogue is not a zero-sum game. It's not a contest where one side has to win and the other has to lose. It's actually an opportunity. By bringing the incredible insights of neuroscience and the deep wisdom of faith traditions together, we get a much more profound, more complete picture of ourselves.
In the end, maybe it's like this. Science can detail every single note and every instrument in the orchestra of the brain. It can show us with breathtaking precision how the music of our minds is played. But faith and philosophy, they invite us to listen in a different way, to ask not just about the notes, but whether there might be a composer. And perhaps the biggest discovery of all is that we need both perspectives, together, to truly hear the full symphony of what it means to be human.